country's motto is E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And in the broader context of what this is about, this isn't just about LGBTQ stuff. It's also the broader DEI umbrella, which is dividing people by race, by gender, by ethnicity, by immigration status. And our president, President Trump, is about bringing people together and reminding us next year, look, it's our 250th birthday for America. That our creed is so unique out of all the history of the world. We are the only country that was founded out of many, one. We refuse to be divided. We refuse the opposite. The left wants to create divides and create many out of one, but we are one.
Okay, Carrie, we just had an amazing weekend in Beaver Creek, and you were playing violin for us at the Coyote Margarita party. That was so much fun. How was your weekend at the Freedom Conference?
I loved it. To me, it was my best one that I've gone to yet, and I think that's what the team they said it was the best one yet. But maybe every year is the best one yet. So it was beautiful. I mean, I had such a great time. I loved. Obviously, the setting is stunning, just gorgeous, world-class mountains. I loved being able to moderate the conversation with Brett Baer for his keynote. Although he doesn't need a moderator, but he requested one, so we gave him one, and I was so thrilled to be able to talk with him and share some of the questions from the audience.
Yes, and you did such a great job moderating, especially when you asked my question to Brett Baer. It was so much fun just hearing about his experience and going through all these different journalistic events from his point of view. So I also had another memory that the Steamboat Conference, it does just keep building on itself. So everyone who attended, I'm excited to be there with you next year. But 4 years ago, Carrie came with her cousin, and he sat down with all of us ELC members, and we talked with him, asked him a million questions for probably 2 hours about growing up in the Mormon church. Everything that, this was like long before your book came out, but he was so fun to talk to. And so just, I don't know, I keep getting to know your story in different ways.
Yeah. I talk about his family a bit in my book, actually. So for anyone who's watching doesn't know, I wrote this book. It's called Motorhome Prophecies, A Journey of Healing and Forgiveness. There were some copies that folks picked up at the Freedom Conference. So yeah, and I remember Nate telling me about how he met you guys and how he was so impressed with all the students, which I think is a credit to Steamboat. I know it's competitive. And I think they only get the best and brightest for the young leaders group because we need good leaders. And so I love what you guys are doing. I want to support it however I can.
Thank you. And yes, Nate, if you are watching, please come back. We miss you and we want to have dinner with you again. Okay, Carrie. So really grateful that you're joining our podcast. I know you've made the rounds on Megyn Kelly, Dr. Phil, Tammy Peterson, and now you're here with me, Paula, on the Steamboat podcast. But I read your book a year ago, and I always wonder what it's like when someone comes up to you and says, "Oh my gosh, I read your book. It was so amazing." And you know that they've read all these very intimate parts of your life that you've shared. What is that experience like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I knew going into it would be very different from my typical journalism, which is writing about economics and politics and policy. But I wrote the book. It's a memoir. The story, if folks don't know, I grew up in a motorhome with 7 biological siblings. My father was claiming to be an LDS prophet, an offshoot Mormon cult leader, basically, and he was excommunicated from the Mormon church. So I let people know that he was not sanctioned by the official LDS church in any way in terms of the child abuse that happened to myself and my siblings. And I got tired eventually. I worked really hard. All of the things they talk about in a Steamboat speech, I call that the resume stuff. All of the accomplishments and to be a Blankley Fellow, you've got to be a go-getter in terms of journalism and things like that. But I was tired of the dichotomy between what was happening in recovering from severe childhood abuse and trauma, and my career. And I realized I wanted to integrate them. And so I also felt called to do it. I felt that I wanted to share my Christian conversion story with others, especially people who are suffering perhaps from child abuse or also from religious abuse. There are a lot of people who walk away from God, or religious community or spiritual community because they see abuse in the name of God. And so at the end of the day, also, I knew for my book, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. So there's nothing really in my book that is truly that intimate in the broad human experience. And so it just was a matter of taking that step to be able to do what I could do to help people coming behind me who might be having some similar struggles.
Yes, and just I read your book like within 24 hours. Like I could not put it down. So, if you have not read Carrie's book, you absolutely need to so that you can ask her more questions at the next Freedom Conference. But it is an incredible book. Can you share with us a bit about your childhood?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I called the book Motorhome Prophecies because we lived in this motorhome, and but we also lived in sheds and tents and houses. The only constant was chaos. And by the end, I went to 17 public schools and homeschool. And eventually, as adults, and late teenage years for my brother, um, eventually over time, four of my siblings have attempted suicide, and I was suicidal, which I talk about in the book. I don't delve into deeply in my siblings' suicide attempts. I do that for their own privacy, but I do share that this happened just so that folks know the severity of the abuse and also the importance of recovering from childhood trauma. Because children who are abused, especially multiple abuses, they sometimes call that complex abuse.
Mm.
So just different ways you could be abused: physical, sexual, mental, emotional, spiritual. I basically had all of those. I was sexually abused by one of my schizophrenic brothers. And children who have abuse are significantly more likely to commit suicide, also commit crimes, and have antisocial behavior as an adult. So I wrote the book with the hope and the prayer of helping others to break the cycle of generational trauma, because it certainly fell on me where I kept self-sabotaging, and that's one of the themes of the book is how to break through generational sin. The Bible talks about, and I mentioned this in the book. Jesus says, "Who among you, if your son asks for bread, you give a stone? If he asks for fish, you give a serpent?" And when there's child abuse, the father gives a stone and the father gives a serpent. And instead of dropping the stone and dropping the serpent, what happens is we go out to the serpent store, we go out to the stone store, and we multiply stones and serpents in the exact opposite way that Jesus, when he was feeding the 5,000, multiplied bread and fish. And so the child of an alcoholic is much more likely to become an alcoholic. The child of a drug addict is much more likely to become a drug addict. The child of an abuser becomes an abuser or marries an abuser, or in my case, dates abusers,
Mm.
until we decide that we are going to drop the stones and we are going to crush those snakes. And that's what this book is about, that journey.
And what's amazing to me in your book is at the same time that you um, left your family, and I mean, you have like a heartbreaking chapter where you decide to go to BYU and leave everything behind. And at the same time that you are kind of ascending and breaking free, you're struggling with these abusive relationships. And so I want to understand more what was going on in your mind and in your heart that both led you to break free, but also the pain that you were going through at that time.
Yeah, well, I hit a crossroads by the time I hit 18. I've told a few people if I ever give a TED talk, I'll start it out by saying that I grew up in a rolling insane asylum, And these days, America is becoming a rolling insane asylum also. But for me personally, that meant I was living in a motorhome with 10 people, including a 200-pound man who wanted to rape me, which was my brother. So living in a motorhome with 10 people is inherently already a very enclosed place where you don't have privacy. And then you combine that with child abuse and psychological just warfare, basically, because my dad would always tell us for hours a day how evil we were and how satanic we were. And he told my schizophrenic brothers they deserve their illness because they were evil. So eventually I realized I had enough, and I knew that I was not physically safe to be living in such a place. And so I in the book I describe it, my first investigative journalism project is my father a prophet. And so I investigated my own dad. And I sorted through, he had a couple boxes in a fiberglass trailer in the back of our motorhome attached. And I sorted through those boxes and found a lot of things that really disturbed me about him. And I came to the conclusion that he was, if he ever was a prophet, he was a false prophet now. And
Hmm.
I told him I was going to leave. And so he raised his hand, like making an oath, and he said, I prophesy in the name of Jesus, you'll be raped and murdered. And by that point, my schizophrenic brother had already groped me and tried to rape me. My dad says I'm getting raped. So, gallows humor, I tell people I'm getting raped, whatever I do,
Oh
based on
gosh.
this trajectory. But I was willing to take the risk. It's like Russian roulette. You may or may not get the bullet in your brain. But I knew if I stayed at home, it was going to be more of the same. And I knew if I left, it would at least have the potential to be something better.
Hmm.
So that was why I left. And my dad said my blood changed, that I was no longer his daughter, and I was disowned, and I was not allowed home all through college. And in some ways, it was kind of like almost like a quarantine, because it meant that I at least was protected, or, kept away from the craziness, even though I love my family and I wanted to be with them. But at the same time, I also wanted to be safe, and I wanted to pursue education and all those normal college things. But I
Yeah.
told the students at Liberty University once, during their convocation, they have the whole student body, 10,000 students once a week. And I was invited to speak to them. And I joked with them. I said, for those of you who had a rough freshman week, that was a cakewalk, peanuts compared to what I went through. And maybe there were some in the audience, I'm guessing, who had something similar traumas. But in average, for an American student, I was dealing with a lot more.
Yes, and for someone to grow up and spiritually abuse you that way and even use the name of Jesus, where was your faith after that point, after going through all that pain?
Yeah, well, I talk in the book. Eventually, there were multiple things that happened, but eventually, I became an agnostic. I became someone who was very much not believing in God. I was not believing in a higher power. I was agnostic, which I like to say is it's a fence sitter, because atheist is saying there is no God. A
Mhm.
believer says there is. I said, I don't know. And so I'm just sitting here in the middle. At that point, I said, I don't know, and I don't care, because if there is a God, he hates me and I hate him back, because otherwise, why would he have allowed all of this to happen in his name? And so I was agnostic for about 12 years. And then through some very unexpected circumstances, I became a Christian. I sometimes joke that I became a Christian because of Christians and in spite of Christians. Uh,
Mm.
but I myself am a very imperfect Christian also. But I think what's so important, and something that Steamboat is just incredible for, is to defend truth. I was just waffling, without an anchor. And that's, I think, what separates conservatives from liberals in today's modern context. Uh, Claudine Gay, who was the former president of Harvard, she was thrown out because she didn't protect her students from anti-Semitism. But I remember something in the hearing they had around anti-Semitism with her, and she used the phrase "my truth." And I said, that's the difference between truth that exists with a capital T and my truth, lowercase m, lowercase t. And I had lived my life without belief in an absolute truth. And I think there is so much evidence for truth with a capital T that I just couldn't deny it anymore.
Mm, that idea, this moral relativism, has led to a lot of things in our society, abortion becoming widespread, and just people, they're not able to decide on things, and they don't want to make decisions like that. But how did you have trouble with that at all growing up? Like, is this true, or is this just my truth? And what was your view with Christianity in that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the Bible, Jesus says that he is the way, the truth, and the life.
Mm.
And I had grown up with a belief in truth. But because I had been abused by people who had used God's name, I threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I talk about that in the book, the very big difference between God and religion, or religion and relationship, divine relationship. And religion is a human-run institution. I know my Catholic friends, I'm Protestant, we have different views of what the word church means. But from my vantage point, the idea that human-run religion is God is totally not true, because it is run by humans. It is run by people who are created. It is not the creator. We worship the creator. But it can be very easy to confuse those, which is why I think in the media, legacy media is so excited to attack any misbehavior by a pastor
Yeah.
or a priest, and just it's gotcha. And now to me, and I used to be that way when I was agnostic. I would just say, well, there's more evidence for why I hate religion. Um, but now, as a believer, I understand that is not God. But again, it can be very confusing being raised under that.
So I saw that yesterday you attended a movie premiere for the Revival Generation, which is looking at the trends in Gen Z and their return to religion. And you talk a lot in your book about mental health and the science behind forgiveness, the science behind prayer, changing your brain. What trends do you see in Gen Z, and how do you think that will change the mental health landscape in America?
Yeah, yeah, the film was amazing. And yeah, folks should definitely check it out if you want to get some good news. A nice shot in the arm, a good shot. Go watch The Revival Generation. It's a documentary about something that's only been happening the last 2 years, so it's just getting started. And I think there's so much more exponential potential for this organization. It's called Unite Us, and they've been on 17 college campuses. I think they've got 4 more large campuses already booked for September. But just in 2 years, reaching more than 100,000 students, in-person events, and just numerous spontaneous baptisms, mass baptisms, young people on campuses who are hungry for truth with a capital T. And the film talks about that. And what I loved about it was that it very much depicts the wrestling
Hmm.
that comes with uh, a true walk with God. Because the last chapter of my book, I titled it Wrestling with God. And that's the name Israel means, he wrestles with God. And funny enough, after I submitted my book, then Jordan Peterson, his book came announced after I had submitted mine. And his latest book is called We Who Wrestle with God. Um, and I think part of why Gen Z this approach that's depicted in the movie is resonating is because Gen Z wants authenticity. They don't want church to be a fake place where people pretend to be holy and righteous and, dressing up all in your Sunday best fancy, all scrubbed, but then behaving in really unchristian ways, the way that I saw my father doing that, because I would see my father preach about all these values and then I would see how he would abuse us. And that was a big reason why I left. So I see that happening in our uh, young people today, that a lot of them are leaving because of similar reasons. But what I love about their approach is one of the things they say in the movie is I share my sin first, and
Hmm.
that's how other people feel comfortable sharing their sin. So in some respects, the book is me sharing my sin first, that I'm sharing my struggle. And I've seen since the book's come out that I've had a lot of people thank me for being vulnerable and they can see themselves in my walk.
Yes. And what about the mental health aspect? How did becoming a Christian change and start to heal some of those traumas that you experienced?
Yeah, I definitely write a lot about this and talk a lot about the scientifically proven connection between faith and mental health, and how even thankfully, now at the federal level under
Yeah.
President Trump, HHS, the Health and Human Services, they're recognizing this. And so I created a nonprofit. It's called Healthy Faith. It's with United Charitable as our fiscal sponsor. And for the past 2 years, we've hosted a conference at the Museum of the Bible. It's called The Bible and Mental Health. And we've brought in some of the country's best experts at the intersection of faith and mental health. And we talk about the science that proves going to church, religious practice, faith, prayer, religious community, it
Hmm.
is strongly associated with low depression, low suicide, low addiction. And that's from places like Harvard School of Public Health has shown this, the National Bureau of Economic Research has shown this, Psychiatric Times did a literature review of more than 100 studies on this issue and found a strong correlation between faith and mental health. They did find in some cases of the studies there was a negative correlation, and that's what I would say my story was about, where it was a negative experience with religion, and my siblings' mental health suffered because of the religious experience. But again, this is where the legacy media comes in and they cherry pick those few little studies instead of, and ignore the vast majority of the other studies showing how good it is for people and for society. And so for me personally, there are some specific spiritual practices that I went through, including a practice called a deep healing prayer ministry, sometimes called deliverance ministry or sozo prayer ministry.
Hmm.
And it's a practice of going through traumatic memories systematically, one by one, over a period of time. So it's broken up, so it's not all overwhelming.
Hmm.
For me, I had two prayer ministers ministering to me, and we did this over a period of months. And we redeemed these memories. And in neuroscience, there's a concept called neuroplasticity, which is the rewiring of our brains and the rewiring of the circuitry, the neural circuitry. And that's what spiritual practice does, is it rewires the neural circuitry of our brains. And when it's done, that's why I named my nonprofit Healthy Faith. It's when faith is practiced in a healthy way, not in a control way. Because there is a known concept called religious addiction, because the human brain can become addicted to anything.
Hmm.
I'm reading a book right now called Atomic Habits, which is a very crazy popular book about how to create new habits. And he looks at a lot of neuroscience, and he talks about the reward, the dopamine cycle of the brain. The human brain can become addicted to basically anything.
Hmm.
The most common ones, obviously, are substances like drugs and alcohol, but the pornography, addiction, gambling, you name it. And religion is one of those. And so it's a very powerful experience to be in a religious euphoria. And so I had to learn the difference between toxic abuse of religion and the healthy life-giving form.
Hmm. How is this concept, how is mental health and bringing your faith into it? It's so different from what we're seeing in a lot of states where they are telling licensed therapists you cannot talk about your religion to patients. And I've seen and known some people who have had to give up their license because the required therapy model is always affirmation of what the person is going through. Um, so I'm curious your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and that's what's really interesting with President Trump because he recently signed an executive order saying that people cannot be discriminated against if they bring their faith into their workplace. And so I'm actually curious. This is one thing I just did a podcast with the National Religious Broadcasters, and this is one of the things that we were talking about. How does that square at the federal level with these states? Because yes, exactly as you mentioned, there are people who are leaving California. One of my advisors for Healthy Faith, who has spoken at my conference, Bible and Mental Health Conference, her name is Dr. Shani Anderson. She fled to Virginia from California for that very reason, because they wanted her to force her and coerce her to affirm practices and beliefs that she did not believe were healthy and life-giving to the patients. And so she fled to Virginia. I hope where she is now, she will remain able to continue practicing. But yeah, I'll give a few statistics. So first of all, the therapists are between the neighborhood of 60 and 70% are atheist or agnostic. And so you have that. You have that fact. And then on the other side, you have the fact that 81% of Americans say they believe in God. That's according to Gallup. So you have this massive cavernous difference between mental health practitioners and then the patients themselves. And there's a guy at Harvard Medical School who is devout Jewish. His name is David Rosmarin. And he has found in his research at Harvard Medical that 76% of patients say, I want spirituality infused in my mental health care. And yet,
Hmm.
71% of patients I say that I have little to no training in how to do that. So it's a train wreck, really, where the
Yeah.
very thing that could save someone's life, spiritual practice in mental health care, is being denied to the people who need it.
And I mean, there's a lot of trends all over the country from Gen Z becoming more religious than the previous generations, and also just what we're seeing with President Trump and his formation of the White House Faith Office. I know that you were there yesterday. Can you tell us, can you give us kind of an inside look of what faith is like inside the White House?
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging because Pastor Paula White, who is running that now, she is President Trump has elevated this office. So, first of all, in the past, they would lump in faith with other things like community and neighborhood initiatives and faith. Long mouthful for this type of thing. And now it's called the White House Faith Office. That's it. White House Faith Office. And it's in the West Wing. And so she has direct access to the president and all the cabinet members who are coming in regularly. And it's so amazing to see how welcome faith is in the White House. It's not, to be clear, it's not about coercion. That's where the Constitution talks about Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion. There's no forced religion. No one is forcing anyone to believe or not believe. It is, though, acknowledging in our founding documents, it talks about our rights flowing from a creator. So you can't separate belief in God from our founding fathers and our founding country. So it is amazing, though, to see how, and so yes, I was there yesterday for a briefing with Pastor Paula White, who is the director of the White House Faith Office, um, to hear what they're working on about religious freedom, protecting against religious persecution, restoring the rights of those who are arrested for silently praying at abortion clinics, for example. And so it's really great. And to even be at the Kennedy Center for that documentary that I mentioned that we talked about, um, to me, that's a cultural watershed moment that there is the crown jewel of American culture is the Kennedy Center, and to have a film about young people honoring and glorifying God, it was a very special moment.
That's amazing. I had a really great conversation with Dr. Spalding all about the Constitution and um, these ideas of that we're all created equal because it's a truth given by the Creator. So just hearing you talk about it and speaking today about faith and its role in our country, it's really been amazing. It's not something that we get to talk a lot about. So, Carrie, thank you so much for joining the Steamboat podcast, and I'm excited to see you again at the conference next year.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Paula. And thank you to everyone who supports the Steamboat Institute. We're so grateful for your commitment to freedom and to the ideas that made America what it is.
Thank you, everyone.